So last year, Tears of the Kingdom outdid Elden Ring and Baldur's Gate 3 without even trying, right? It was a 10 out of 10 title that innovated and improved on Breath of the Wild in every single way. It was a phenomenal experience and a very impressive Zelda game. But the narrative, after the game came out, or even before the game came out, was that like, oh, it's just a rehash, it's the same thing over again. It's like it was a cope. Like even then, even like pre-release, the idea that this game was going to bomb was laughable. And now, a year after launch, seeing how it's retained its relevancy far more than games like Elden Ring or Cyberpunk 2077 or Baldur's Gate 3, right? Baldur's Gate 3 came out after Tears of the Kingdom, and yet is less relevant than Tears of the Kingdom is. Like, you can see that Tears of the Kingdom is here to stay, and it is an iconic Zelda game that will grow in popularity and relevancy for all time, right? The cope that people had right out of the gate in regards to this is just nothing but copes, right? Whenever you see people complain about the UI or complain about the structure or complain about like the fact that it's a sequel, like they're just coping, right? The reality is Tears of the Kingdom is better than your favorite game, right? And right now, people are scrambling to try and damage control that. They're doing everything they possibly can to write this game off and ignore it and like pretend it's not a big deal. But one of the things they really clung on, the thing that they really emphasized, is that like I don't want to play Breath of the Wild again. Like I own that game already. Like it wasn't good to begin with, but I don't want to play it again. Like they really emphasized the fact that Tears of the Kingdom was a sequel to Breath of the Wild. Like, oh, we didn't get anything new. When are we getting a new top-down Zelda? When are we going to play a Zelda? Like, Nintendo's not giving us what we want. They really came out and tried this. They really thought this would work. And what happens? Nintendo announces The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. Like, September 27th, 2024. A little over a year after Tears of the Kingdom, right? After all that time, all that effort, all that damage control for Tears of the Kingdom, Nintendo puts out a sequel in Echoes of Wisdom before FromSlop, quicker than FromSlop was able to put out a DLC for their only relevant game. Like, can you really process how insane that is? That Echoes of Wisdom came out quicker than Shadows of the Erdtree did for Elden Ring. It took you longer to wait for a DLC than for Nintendo to release an entirely new game in the same series, right? That is insane to me. Even if you believe that Elden Ring is better than Tears of the Kingdom, it's not. Like the sheer fact of the matter is that Echoes of Wisdom is coming out, is a completely new novel game with completely new mechanics, with a completely different feel, with is a new thing. And Shadows of the Erdtree simply can't compete with that. And because Zelda is a better IP than Elden Ring in general, the base game Elden Ring can't compete with that either. So again, it's kind of the Power World thing all over again, right? Where it's not enough for Power World to sell 20 million copies, right, at a reduced price, right? It's not possible to surpass Pokemon by doing that. What you're gonna have to do is have annual releases sell that much for 20 years. Have a popular animated series, have merch, have comic tie-ins, have spin-off series. Again, you have to compete with the biggest brand in the world. I don't understand what's so difficult to understand about this, but again, Power World was doomed to failure. It was never going to compete with Pokemon. Long term was obvious. I think even hardcore fans were saying that, but it's kind of shocking how even in the short term, Pokemon couldn't remain relevant. At the very least, people will look back on Digimon and just be like, oh, the first anime season was good. The first anime season is series is a classic, right? Digimon had its Day in the Sun. Yokai Watch had the first couple of releases, right? There are people can look back on franchises like those and just be like, oh yeah, that there was a period of time where it was competing with Pokemon in this way or this capacity for a very short period of time. Power World never had that relevancy, right? It had the 2-week it was a 2 week it was a flavor of the 2 weeks, right? It only lasted 2 weeks. It wasn't a full month. It was 2 weeks. Like it had a 2 week period where everyone was pretending it was like the greatest thing ever, that it was going to surpass Pokemon, that it was way better than it, that Nintendo was doomed, that they did not plagiarize models. They did. Like that it wasn't a rip off of Pokemon. It was. They spent like they spent like all that time like shilling for this mid video game, only for it to get wrecked, you know, by the Pokemon Direct like in March. And there wasn't even like a mainline announcement. They just announced like Legends EA and like a couple of mobile games and some new anime projects. Like again, Power World got wrecked. Like Power World was already forgotten by the time that Pokemon Direct dropped, right? And the way it looks now, like comparing Echoes of Wisdom to Shadow of the Erdtree, yeah, Shadows of the Erdtree is absolutely in the same boat, right? This is a DLC that only appeals to hardcore fans of Elden Ring, which are probably like, there's probably only like 500,000 of them, like worldwide, realistically. 500,000 people, playing this game, like pretending it's good, pretending the lore is interesting, pretending it's difficult. Like, oh, I, I, I only had to summon, like, I don't summon to make it easier, like, to make it harder on me. Like, again, like, Shadow of the Erdtree had no real relevance, period, right? Like, it is impossible for a game like Elden Ring, something that filtered, like, 95% of its player base by being boring, unintuitive, repetitive, and just broken, right? Like, something like Elden Ring was never going to have a successful DLC expansion. Meanwhile, like, Nintendo is putting out better games that are releasing at full price, that are completely original and are doing more things with their IPs, right? It's not just Zelda, right? Brothership is going to outdo Shadow of the Erdtree. Pokemon's going to outdo Shadow of the Erdtree, right? Like we have like Dragon Quest 3 is going to be better, right? Again, what exactly is FromSoft going to do to remain relevant in the near future, right? Like it's just going to be the same thing over and over and over again. They're going to release some game, they're going to overhype some DLC to keep it relevant, and then once the DLC comes out, the game is instantly forgotten, right? This has been a pattern that's been like repeated since Dark Souls, actually, right? Really, it feels like just the anticipation for the DLC is just a way for like FromSoft to create the illusion that like the gaps between releases are a lot shorter than they actually are. But yeah, like Echoes of Wisdom just looks like a real innovative, inventive little Zelda game. Like it's doing so much to make me happy as a hardcore fan, and like when I compare it to something as sad and pathetic as Elden Ring, I honestly feel a little bad for FromSoft fans, right? Like this is really the best you're ever gonna have, is just some mid Zelda 2 clone in 2024. Like you it is appalling to see just how big of a gap in quality there is between Zelda and FromSoft.